Welcome back to Why Blank Lost for Big Brother after a week off due to the show basically taking a week off. I'm David Bloomberg, and I decided to do this podcast the way Mecole played the game, under the radar, or under the table, as the case may be. And with me once again, in full view, is my co-host, Ovi Kabir.
David, I am happy to be back here. I didn't expect this. I think the jokes have already started, and I think we have a long show ahead of us. Happy to be here. Warning to all our viewers and listeners, allergy season has hit me very hard, so you'll hear a few sniffles. We'll try to mute myself, but just live with me on that.
Okay, yeah, you mentioned it's going to be a long podcast. I don't think my back can take this. So, just for the rest of the podcast, pretend that I'm under the radar and under.
Come
the
back
table.
with us now, yeah.
So before I do that, funny story. I decided to get a head start on the notes for this podcast, which head start. That's all you can see of me right now. When it seemed very clear that Felicia was going. Now you'd think that I would learn my lesson, but no. And so, yeah, I had already started writing notes for Why Felicia Lost. My intro at this point, was going to say, this may be the first week where the evictee was actually pretty locked in once the veto meeting took place. And then I was going to talk about that there were some discussions of flipping, but those got shut down pretty quickly. Yeah, so much for that. They came back to life, and obviously the flip did happen, and here we are.
Here we are. I mean, I feel like this happens week in and week out, where I will get a text from David, shortly after Thursday's episode, Saturday or so. He's like, okay, well, I'm starting the notes. I feel pretty good about it. And then Sunday, Monday, it just flip-flops, goes back and forth. I mean, I think the players, we thought this would change as the season goes in, that they're going to stop the flip-flopping. But I think they're just playing it to the last minute. They're just kind of like how I did all my exams and studied last minute and try to see how it would work. And that's how the season has been going.
Yeah, it's like I said, you'd think I'd learn my lesson. But no, I keep having high hopes each time that this is going to be more like a normal Big Brother season in that regard. And so we'll see how this coming week goes. Now, before the veto meeting, of course, things got a little scary for Corey, even though he never knew about it. So there were really 3 people under consideration this week. And Corey is lucky that some of the info that came out later in the week wasn't circulating in the house before the veto meeting.
That is very true. I mean, I think we saw the beginning of the episodes of essentially Felicia throwing incredible shade. Now, I don't even think I could say shade. It's like missiles right at Corey. And we see Corey in his bathrobe just saying, all right, well, I didn't expect it. Trying to figure out how quickly can he leave the room?
Yes. Yeah, let's go play bumper pool. Yeah. And we have a little bit more about Corey in a minute here. But first, just to remind people, 2 weeks ago, we discussed both Cameron and Jared.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, Cameron came back into the house. So when he eventually leaves or wins, we will have a brand new podcast about him. But Jared pretty much covered Jared. So we were good. Now we're back to our usual examination of just one player as we compare Mecole's game to a set of guiding rules that I originally wrote back in 2004 and have modified ever since. We'll analyze how she did using what we saw on TV, live feeds, interviews, and other information. And the most recent version of the rules is posted at robhasawebsite.com/bigbrotherrules. But before we get to those rules, we always have some things to discuss about the week in general. And I already mentioned Cameron, and as much as it pains me to say it, one reason that whenever Cameron does presumably lose, it'll be so much different, is that he's actually been improving his gameplay a little.
Mm-hmm.
Not much. He's still not good, but yeah, I know. Don't ask the cam stands that on the internet, but at least he's trying to create alliances, play people against each other instead of just like pushing through like a bull in a china shop. Now, mind you, those so-called allies almost all want him out, and they're just pretending to be with him. But they don't want him out yet, which is good for him because the longer they keep him around, the fewer comps he absolutely has to win to make it to the end. And the longer he stays around, the more likely he plays in veto until he's automatically in. I think they should be targeting him immediately, but they all seem to want to keep him as a shield for probably longer than they should. At this point, I honestly wouldn't be surprised if my winner prediction of him comes true. I'd cringe, but I wouldn't be surprised.
No, I was thinking exact same thing is that your winner pick was Cameron, my winner pick was Matt, and I think there's a strong likelihood that we see at least one of them in those final two chairs. Because while Cameron is in the hot seat, what we've been seeing week in and week out, he has now positioned himself really kind of the middle of the entire pack in a way that each side are hoping that he will take somebody out on the other side. So they're worried that once they get rid of Cameron, it's open season and the bullets will shoot at each other on each side. So, I mean, I got to give credit where credit's due. I mean, Cameron has done a good job, honestly, in my eyes, of trying to figure out a way to pivot his game slightly coming into it. I don't know what would have been the result if we saw Jared coming back into this, but I do think this is a positive way for Cameron. Both you and I were pleasantly surprised seeing Cameron try to work his way, like you said, not just force his way through, but kind of maneuver in such a way that he gets back in the game and has a position where he's not completely on the bottom of the totem pole.
Yeah. And so, we will see. He's still being pushy. He's still being very blunt. But it's possible. I think your winner pick has a much better chance of actually pulling it off. We'll see. But meanwhile, Corey has gone in the opposite direction and done some serious damage to his game over the past couple weeks, as I, kind of mentioned earlier. Even though he avoided actually getting nominated this time, almost everyone in the House would at least consider doing it, with some actively trying. And part of it is him overplaying. Part of it is people thinking he's overplaying more than he actually is. And ironically, part of it was that he keeps this trend of being too honest. Like, he just says the honesty is astonishing. And it's like, why are you telling everyone your game? Stop it. I mean, it does seem that helped stop him from getting backdoored because, like, just before the night before the veto meeting, Cameron was leaning that way. But then he talked to him, and Corey was his usual very honest self. And I think Cameron believed him when he said that Corey wasn't coming for him. Of course, then like a day or two later, Cameron was right back on the let's target Corey train. So it lasted just long enough. Now, part of his over-honesty is him repeatedly telling people how safe he feels, including directly to the HOH. We saw that with Cameron. Like, he's like, oh, I know you're not coming after me. I feel so good. And Cameron's like, does he not know me? Does he not know how I like to cause chaos? Now, maybe it's part of a strategy to make people feel trusting of him. Like, if you say, I feel so comfortable with you that I'm not worried, it probably makes you feel better about me. So maybe it's the strategy, but a lot of times it comes off more like he's kind of rubbing it in their faces.
It's interesting because I think we've seen throughout the whole season that Corey's trajectory has gone kind of up and down, up and down. I mean, there's been times initially, I think I want to say week 4, week 3, where we're like, Corey seems to be in a worse position now because of the things that have gone down. And the issue right here, not the issue, but I think is that people now have turned on Corey in a way that they don't see any actions he does in a good face way.
Yes.
So it doesn't matter if he is actually being authentic, which I think actually Corey is quite authentic in the House, and he's trying to be maneuver in the best way possible. But people think of him as this super mind, a mastermind person, and so everything he's doing is so calculated. Because and I think about it from
Mhm.
this past week, where, or I think it was maybe the week before, where Mecole was essentially saying that, I know Corey Stick, he's going to spend 15 minutes with me each day to check in on me, and that's going to be it, just to make sure I'm there with him. But that's the thing, is that it's so calculated in a way that they view it as bad. But on Corey's end of things, he's just like, I want to check in on the people that I want to work with,
Right.
versus no one else is checking on with Mecole, but she doesn't see it in a good faith
Right.
nature. So she's thinking Corey is just looking at her as just some sort of tool to use, when he does want to work with her.
Yeah, and that was, one revelation to her, I think, when she got out of the house was, hey,
Mm-hmm.
actually Corey did want to work with you. But then, yeah, we'll get into some of her interviews. Is there anything else you want to discuss about the players before we get to our next regular segment?
You know what? Other than that, Felicia came in strong
Oh
this
yeah.
entire week, and that she, I will say that I just love watching it. I love the TV element, regardless of when she's like, "Did this just blow up my game?" Like, I
Mm-hmm.
just love seeing somebody who wants to be there, fight for it. Doesn't matter what's going on there. You say what's on your mind, because at this point you're on the block and you just want to throw it out there. I think we're going to get into it throughout these rules, but I think the most unfortunate thing for most viewers to watch is seeing somebody on the show and they don't do anything to change their
Yeah.
position. They have the ability to do it. And I just want to say, I appreciate Felicia, even if it didn't work out this week, which it did work out. And I think there was other factors in there, but I appreciated Felicia for just putting it out there. And I also, to probably your disagreement, I appreciate Cameron at times where he just puts it out there and tries and goes for it. I like players who play. I think viewers like that too.
Well, from a viewership perspective, yes, and that's something that sometimes people in social media comments don't understand the difference between, because they will comment on my TikToks and they'll be like, this person's a great player, they're entertaining. And it's like, okay, one does not equal the other. They're actually a terrible player, but that's why they're entertaining. And so don't confuse the two. If you want to say they're great to watch on TV, fine, have at it. They are, fun to watch on TV, but that doesn't make them a great player. And some people, some viewers, can't separate the two. But definitely we separate the two here.
I imagine we'll have some people commenting about the separation in
You
here.
never know. So with that, it's time for our Julie Chen Moonves is wrong about blank segment. And this week, I want to focus on one answer she gave Dalton Ross in his interview with her. He asked Julie if Mecole lost because she wasn't making deals. And Julie said no. And here's the quote: "It wouldn't make sense for her to wheel and deal. She's not a schemer. She held true to who she had the alliance to, Felicia, and didn't try to jump into new relationships with people she doesn't particularly like or trust. Her undoing was Corey scheming and flipping the vote against her." Okay, folks, this is why all of you should continue listening to us instead of asking Julie that question, because she has no idea and she doesn't make any sense. Mecole shouldn't have made deals because she's not a schemer. I don't even know what that means, because I mean, no spoilers for the rules that we're going to get to in a couple minutes here, but maybe that's part of the problem. I mean, from a logical perspective, it's like saying an MMA fighter who lost didn't throw punches because they're not a puncher. Uh, okay, then maybe there's a deeper problem there. And then to blame it all on Corey scheming and flipping the vote, it just speaks to Julie, again, as usual, really not having a full understanding of what happened, and also shifts the blame off of Mecole herself. Again, a basic lack of understanding about the game that she hosts, which, newsflash, Julie, it's about scheming.
Yeah, it's just so funny. I think it's kind of what we said in the beginning of it. A lot of the members in the house don't look at Corey with good faith actions.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like the same idea has permeated into Julie's
Mm-hmm.
thought side on all of this. Because I mean, it's just so wild to think that eh, the game is about scheming. And here's the thing: is we can talk about the differences about maybe week 1, week 2, week 3, maybe, when you're that early in the game. But when you are 65 days into the
Yeah.
game, like you are right now 2/3 essentially into the
Mm-hmm.
game. And if you're saying somebody, well, they didn't go home because they didn't scheme, or like, then why are you on Big Brother? And I think it's just like confusing why Julie would say that about Mecole, to think that.
Yes. Yes. I mean, except it's Julie who doesn't know the game herself. Um, And we'll get to the rest of that in a couple minutes here. But before we go to the rules, I want to mention that the Survivor version is available in a shorter and much more colorful version in poster form. Normally, this is where I say go to robhasawebsite.com/yxlostfeed and scroll down and click on it. We're having some problems with that particular page. We're looking into it. You can also get to that page by going to this special shortened version. It's called so it's shor.b shor.by/yxlostfeed. That'll take you to the same place. It's like a little shortened version of the link. But like I said, go there, scroll down to the poster. There's also the poster on the T-shirt and the very checklist shirt that I am wearing today. Which, hey, what's the first thing it says on there? Scheme and plot. Weird.
Hmm.
So again, you can go to go to this page, scroll down, and click to your heart's content. All right. Well, I've mentioned before that I take notes about things that happen through the entire season. So when a player is evicted or eventually wins, I can go back and retrieve those as part of our full deep dive here. As of the moment Mecole was voted out, I had 28 pages of such notes. After I went through and moved all of the Mimi information from there to my specific notes for this podcast, I now have 27 pages of notes. That's how little was in there about her. I mean, she purposely avoided playing. Was
Hmm.
she too quiet? If so, how did that cause people to target her? It's time to figure out why Mecole lost. Now, we start with the first rule because despite the fact that Julie doesn't understand the concept, the first and most important rule is, of course, to scheme and plot. And right off the bat, we have a question that is going to follow us this whole podcast.
Hmm.
Because I feel like Mecole knew scheming and plotting was part of the game. Theoretically, hypothetically, but she never actually did it. She talked about strategy, mostly to us and to herself, like when she ranted in the storage room early in the season or in a voting shout out a few weeks ago. The thing is, I kept waiting for her to break out and show that she was strategic. And it never happened. Even when she was on the block this week, even though she claimed in interviews that she knew the pawns were getting evicted this season because of all the flipping, she literally told Julie in her longer Instagram interview that she knew Corey was a master manipulator this season and has flipped many votes, so she could be in danger. And yet, she still didn't do anything about it. She barely raised a finger in her own defense, and when she did, it was far too little, far too late.
I think the hardest thing is that sometimes when we see players and they make certain moves in the house, it's tough for us as viewers, because we're watching all the live feeds, we're seeing the
Mhm.
updates on our couch, essentially see what's going on wrong. But then we look at the player's perspective, and your perspective is your reality, right? And so then it makes sense when they come out and you hear what they say, or understand that maybe they just didn't see it the way we did. I mean,
Right.
I'm a perfect example that I didn't see some things happening on my season that it took me a while to come out to see that. These gameplays, I was like, oh man, why I didn't do this wrong, versus when I was in the house I was like, this is the best way to work. The issue I found, especially with this rule 1, is that we knew Mecole her perspective was kind of our reality as well. She
Mm-hmm.
saw what was going on. It wasn't a case of she is being, misted, or she is unable to find the reads. She saw what was happening, and this is why this episode is going to be hard for me, because I do like Mecole. I really like her. I
Yeah.
think she is a good person. I think she's very intelligent, and what we just saw just kind of confused me, because this lack of gameplay where she just decided to play an under the radar game like you showed right in the beginning of this episode. It just never stopped, because the under the radar games means that for a while, and then you sneak up on somebody, because that's why you're saying she
Mm-hmm.
never tried to, even on the week where she was on the block, where she saw the flip happening. Instead of trying to change the trajectory of where the votes were going, she decided to just take it. And I just am so confused, because to play Big Brother is scheming and plotting, and she decided
Yes.
not to do that.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be the reason. Just a heads up. This is definitely the rule that I have the most notes for, about how she did the least for. But yeah, like Dalton Ross asked about her strategy when she was a nominee, and he noted that it seemed to be hanging back and letting Felicia dig her own grave. Mimi acknowledged that she could have been a little more aggressive. You don't say. But she wanted to stay true to how she played the game, quote, which was to not go around making a bunch of BS deals that I knew I couldn't really hold to. So essentially, she wanted to play Big Brother by not making promises that could save her game life, otherwise known as ensuring she wouldn't be playing Big Brother for much longer. I mean, weeks ago, she told Jag that she understands the lying and manipulating, but that's not how she plays. Again, that means she wasn't playing Big Brother. Yeah, I mean, yeah, you mentioned her plan. Rewinding, going back to the beginning, her plan was to lie low. She told Dalton she knew the house would be filled with big personalities and strategists, and she planned to let them do their thing while she hung back. And for the first half of the game, I and others kept giving Mecole credit for lying
Mm-hmm.
low and thinking strategically while expressing that to us privately. People on social media would be like, she's the same as Bowie Jane. I'm like, no, she's expressed that she understands the strategy. We just have to wait for her to come out.
Mm-hmm.
And we expected that. We expected her to break out of her shell and show what a good player she could be. And she stayed in her shell until the door opened for her to leave.
Yeah, it was confusing, because I don't know if it was a mode of wait till jury and see what can happen, but there were so many situations where she truly had a really good position in the house, where she was kind of riding the middle, and
Mm-hmm.
she had options from both ends. And it wasn't a thing of where she chose sides. It was a decision of just basically not choosing a side whatsoever. We saw time and time again alliances being brought to her to bring her in, and she just wouldn't commit to them. Or when she felt hurt by conversation between Sari and Jared from that whole situation
Mm-hmm.
there, without realizing, of course, that Jared
Right.
is Sari's son. There was never a conversation that went on to happen to figure out what can we do to move forward. Her only conversations we saw for a point were through Felicia for a long time. And I wonder that, why was it that we found that she felt like she didn't want to manipulate or kind of scheme in the game? That's the number one rule that we have here.
Yeah.
And I just have to chalk it up that maybe she was concerned about her outside world career. She working as a political consultant. She didn't want to be viewed in a negative light in this type of field. But I think the question is she isn't just a random recruit. She's a super fan.
Yeah.
So if this is the idea that you don't want to be perceived in that certain way, then why apply for the game? Why
Yeah.
play this game?
I feel like, and she didn't say it this way, but I feel like she's one of these people who thought she could come in and change the way the game is played. And we'll get to some of that in a little while. You said something that reminded me. I wish I had thought of this. I could have woven it in here better. But you said, she made a choice not to decide or something like
Mm-hmm.
that. And there's a Rush song called Free Will. And one of the lines is, if you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice.
Mm-hmm.
And that's perfect here. That's why it sprung into my head, because, yeah, she didn't want to decide anything. That
Mm-hmm.
is still making a decision. You are actively removing yourself from the game.
Hmm.
And then the rest of the house removed you from the game. Now, we do have to acknowledge that she was a member of several alliances,
Hmm.
including the Brown Sugar Babes, the Bye Bye Bitches, the Professors, Legend 25. Some of
All
those
of
were,
them.
yeah, some of them were more real than others. Um, she told Mike Bloom that she was very loyal to Brown Sugar Babes, and they were the only ones she trusted. But then that trust was somewhat broken, as you mentioned, when Suri and Jared tried to get Felicia out instead of Izzy. She told Mike, I was just like, I will never trust again. I believed in you guys. Definitely was to my detriment. I should have done more outreach, but I really, really do believe in Brown Sugar Babes. So she got burned by one alliance,
Hmm.
and it's like she was done with it all. Meanwhile, everyone else in the house has been lied to by literally everyone else in the house at some point or another. Two of them were literally voted out unanimously. And yet they all continue to pretend to work with each other, and sometimes they actually do. Mimi hit one little speed bump with her one true alliance, and that was it. She was done.
It was ridiculous in the sense that she chose that she wanted to stay with that alliance, like you said, but then decided not to try to fix things with that said alliance after the measures
Mm-hmm.
happen. I mean, this idea that you just want to stay to yourself, and I mean, this will go into another rule down the line, but I don't want to get too much into. But
Mm-hmm.
scheming and plotting, that was an issue that made her kind of almost a threat because she wouldn't scheme and plot with her alliance members. Like you said, she was in all these alliances, but each of those alliance members were worried about her because, wait, she's not really talking game with me. She's not really being forefront.
Well, that's actually the next thing I have in my notes is because I wrote in my notes months ago, my original notes, that she was smart, but she might be playing too slow, such that those in charge didn't trust her. And that just continued week after week. She kept her cards so close to her chest that I'm not sure anybody even knew she had cards. She never passed along any game information. And her housemates who were trying to play the game, they got tired of it. In her final week, she was trying to figure out why people might be considering her. Jag told her it's because people didn't know where she stood. And in response, she really didn't tell him where she stood, but gave him a pretty generic answer. Meanwhile, you also have Matt saying people don't know where she's aligned. Effing Bowie Jane said on the feeds after the eviction that the problem was they couldn't see her game. Take that in for a moment. Bowie Jane said that about someone else's game. That is rough.
Very rough. I mean, when Bowie Jane is throwing shade on your game,
Yeah.
oh man, that
Yeah.
is like, I mean, it makes me sad that when I think about when we had that 1 week where we discussed essentially how each player is playing in the game,
Mm.
what mode they are. And
Oh,
we
I
put
have a
Mecole,
couple of that. Yeah.
we put Mecole in a lot of those
Yeah.
because we put Bowie Jane with the worst of all of them,
Right.
because she saw the writing on the wall. She knew what she had to do. And we've seen, I mean,
Mecole. Yeah.
Mecole, yes, Mecole, not Bowie Jane,
Yeah.
but we've seen Mecole. I mean, if we're going to talk about a loyal person right now, if you want to manipulate, Bowie Jane stays loyal to the people she needs to. And whether we like it or not, she
Mm-hmm.
says, I'm going to stick with them. This is how I'm going to do it, but I'm going to still scheme with them slightly,
Yeah. Or at
Mecole
least
just
agree with them when they scheme.
agree.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think Mecole was just so shut out and shut everyone else out with the scheming and plotting that even when people came to her to scheme and plot, she decided to just cut them off. She didn't even have to do scheme and plotting.
Right. Yeah. I mean, Corey said in his final words that they were working together a bit early, but they never took the next step to truly do it. And that was on her because he tried, but she would never reciprocate. Even this week, Corey wanted to solidify something with Mimi in America, but Mimi's response was the game needs to be played week by week, which you can only play the game with what you can see, which goes back to what she said about not wanting to make promises that she couldn't keep. She's a fan, but she apparently forgot that not only can you bounce checks in the Big Brother house, sometimes you need to, like when your game life is on the line. She just, I mean, so yeah, although I had mentioned that I didn't have many notes about Mimi, most of what I did are stories like this of her saying no to one person
Mhm.
or another, sometimes even going so far as to tell others, don't give me information. It's better not to know in order to avoid getting in trouble. No, ignorance is not bliss in the Big Brother house. And to combine this point with an earlier one, she told Dalton Ross that while everyone was saying they didn't know where she stood, she said, quote, it was just a convenient characterization because the others didn't know where each other stood either. How would she know when she actively avoided finding anything out? No, it wasn't just a convenient excuse. It was a reality that she avoided.
I think it comes down to, there's people in your life, right, David, that they're friends you have there, but it's sometimes better to have somebody that like where they stand, if they're
Mm-hmm.
against you or think to have you, whether you're working with them versus a friend
Yeah.
that you're not sure where they're at,
Right.
whether they're going to tell the other person or whatnot. I would rather have somebody that I know for a fact, if I have to work with them or do something like that,
Right.
somebody who doesn't like me versus somebody that I'm unsure if I can trust them or not, but they act like you're your friend. And I think, unfortunately, and I'm not saying Mecole as a person is like that, but in the game, that's the
Yes.
perspective it gave off to other people because they couldn't read her mind. They couldn't see that she wants to be a true, loyal, honest person in the game, doesn't want to manipulate because in their
Mm-hmm.
head, they're like, I feel like she's trying to manipulate me because there's no way we're in day 65 plus and she doesn't want to get in an alliance or something like that. That means she must be working with somebody else.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. All right. Well, that was a lot in the first rule, but I think we can move on to the second, which says not to scheme and plot too much and to keep your scheming secret. Now, given the discussion we just had about the first rule, I think it's safe to say Mecole didn't have a problem with most of this rule. In fact, she may be the only person in the Big Brother 25 house who didn't. But because she didn't spread secrets, mostly because she didn't have any secrets to spread, she actively avoided them. In her final speech, she said, loose lips sink ships. But she acted like there was no middle ground, as we discussed in the first rule. And it wasn't loose lips that sunk her ship, it was tight lips. But some of what she said was understandable. Like she told Mike Bloom that America was telling people she wouldn't talk game with her. Mecole wouldn't talk game with America. Um, but that's because Mecole knew America's reputation for telling everybody everything. And still, Mimi apparently viewed anything, any conversation as, quote, ammunition to use against her. The thing is, she didn't have to give America something mind blowing because, yeah, that would be going against this rule. But as we talked about in the first rule, she had to give her something.
No, you're completely right. I mean, I want to backtrack really quickly where you said there's no person probably who rivals her in this one. I would say Bowie Jane rivals her in this rule number 2, where don't scheme and plot too much. I will
I
say in
mean,
this.
but even Bowie Jane, when she's with Corey, she agrees with Corey. When she's with Jag, she agrees with Jag. When she's with
Yeah.
Matt, she agrees with Matt. When she's with Cameron, she agrees with Cameron. At some point, people might compare notes and be like, oh, she agreed with me. She agreed with me. She agreed with me. And they're going to be like, huh. I mean, Mecole wasn't even agreeing. She was just like, nope, nope. I'm
No,
not
you're
going to say
yeah.
anything at all.
She kept it completely a secret. She kept it
Yeah.
completely a secret. And I mean, I kind of go back to what I said initially, where I said that it's kind of having that friend who's lukewarm
Mm-hmm.
and you don't know to trust him. And I think that was the issue for her with Corey in America, specifically Corey, right? That he wanted to work with her
Yeah.
so much. He attempted like, I will not sit by the narrative that I see some people pushing that Corey wanted Mecole out for a
Mm-hmm.
while. Like, he didn't. He knew it was better for a game, but somebody who won, he isn't sure they're with him. And
Right.
2, he's tried so much and they're still like versus Felicia. He knows she's after him, but maybe there's some sort of way to, maneuver it.
Right.
And 4, 2, I mean, we'll get back to the threat stuff. Mecole, while keeping things secret, still had some competition prowess that worries them. So the worry is that she might backstab them. And I
Yeah.
mean, that's why they had to take it.
Yeah. Now, and the thing is, the one place where Mimi went against this rule was in being an obvious duo with Felicia.
Mm.
In the game, she denied to people that they really were that close. But it didn't it didn't fool anyone. And afterwards, she acknowledged to Julie that she was loyal to Felicia. That's what landed her in the nomination chair to begin with. She wasn't the original target. Cameron just didn't want her winning veto and pulling Felicia down. Maybe if she'd talked to players a little bit, people wouldn't have been so certain about her being in a duo with Felicia, and she wouldn't have ended up on the block to begin with.
And there's one other part I have here in my notes about there is one backstabbing she did that I think had a cascade effect, which is ironic because it was probably one of the bigger ones that out of all the stuff that has happened in here, in that double eviction, she put Sari in that competition again. So if people remember, it was a head-to-head. You would choose who would have to go against who, and she puts Sari. She wins her thing, and she chooses who to put up there, and she chooses Sari to go there. And that
which one are you talking about?
I'm talking about the head-to-head.
In a double eviction one?
Yes, the double eviction one.
Because I remember Matt, Jag, and Corey putting her up. I do not remember Mecole putting her up.
Are you sure? Because I thought it was.
I can't say I'm sure, but I mean I made a TikTok of it, so and I also almost put in my notes something about, but I just left it out. But here, now we're discussing it anyway, about her putting Corey in a couple times. Well, at least once, when Corey thought they were on the same page about getting Jared out.
Oh, okay. Because I had it on my thing that she was the one who put Sari up there. I might be wrong then.
Maybe you abbreviated it with a C and you have the wrong.
Yeah, I might. I was thinking that. Yeah. So I just, for my side was that she, and I could be wrong here too, but Sari viewed her as betraying her essentially in that double eviction and causing not being there for the votes for Jared to go there. That cascaded that now you have that alliance where Sari now just wants one of them to go. She doesn't want to help either Felicia or Mecole. And I feel like if I understand that she didn't want to scheme against or campaign against Felicia, but I think there's a difference against campaigning against somebody and campaigning for yourself. And I feel like Sari is somebody she never tried to touch base again with. I'm going to double check that on the thing. Or somebody probably can watch this and fact check me as well.
Yes, I'm sure we will. But remember, it was in line. And if she had picked Sari won the first two.
Yep.
And I believe that was Jag and Matt. And then she lost to Corey.
I thought it was Felicia that put her up against. She won, and then she put those two. But
well, remember in the double eviction, you could only pick one person. You picked your own opponent.
You picked your own opponent?
Yeah, it was in a line. You were in a line, and then you know.
I'm misremembering. I must have wrote something wrong here. My fault.
Okay. So don't send in emails. We know we've got it settled. All right. The third rule talks about the need to be flexible. But okay, before we get to the third, I do want to say your example is still pertinent because she showed Corey that she didn't want to work with him, and this kind of raised a red flag with him. So, like I said, you just had the wrong abbreviation.
I appreciate the save, David. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, back to the third rule, which talks about the need to be flexible. Right off the top of my head, I would have to say Mecole wasn't. But what do you think? Is there anything I'm missing here?
It's tough because I think to be flexible, right? We've kind of talked about this rule with other people. There has to be a pressure for you to have to change in there. And I think off the bat, we don't see Mecole as flexible, but also there was never too much of a reason for her to have to change. Like, I really, truly feel like her under the radar game was working really well for her till the end, where she just did not choose a decision. She didn't choose a side. So yes, she was inflexible in there, but I do think it's strange because we never saw pressure. We never had somebody put a gun to her head and was like, hey, you need to make this decision or not, or you need to figure out how to move here. Because she became kind of a choice where like, who else do we pick? Who else is left here now? And who is somebody that I don't know what to do. I think the flexibility, I guess she was inflexible in this one, but I do feel like it was a lesser degree. It wasn't the thing that made her go home.
Yeah, I mean, did someone try to force her to be flexible? No, I think you have to be flexible on your own. You have to see where the game is going. And steadfastly refusing to play the game is being inflexible. I mean, we discussed at length her plan to lie low, and she stuck to that
Hmm.
way beyond when she should have. On top of that, her game life was on the line this week. She refused to campaign against Felicia. I mean, I guess that kind of goes along with not campaigning at all, but she specifically said,
Yeah.
I will not campaign against Felicia. Okay, congratulations. You're out the door. And so it's, yeah, she just didn't change.
Yeah.
I don't know if she didn't realize that she needed to, or she looked around and said, no, I'm going to continue to play my way come hell or high water.
It kind of goes back to what you were saying a while ago, where you said that it kind of felt like she went into the game hoping to change the game, how
Mm-hmm.
it could be played. And I just think that was maybe on her head, that she felt like she could kind of get to the end. And I don't know if it might have been. It's hard to see because we're gonna have to see down the line. I'm gonna
Mm-hmm.
call it the Taylor effect, or what we're gonna call it, where Taylor was more so somebody who had to just take the hits and figure her way through it, and she
Mm-hmm.
kind of stuck to her guns. Is like, I'm gonna kill people with kindness, and that was kind of Tyler's way
Right.
to the end. And I wonder if, just because it being such a recent season before this one, Mecole wanted to emulate something like that. The issue is that she wasn't able to gear strong allies around her. And I think that's where the flexibility comes in, right? You have allies who trust you at such a point, but as the game goes deeper and deeper, they need more commitment. It's kind of a relationship, right? When
Yeah.
you're in a relationship, it's your first 3 months, 6 months, whatever it may be. Things are in a way that don't feel as committed as you need to be. But when you're 3, 4, 5, years down the line, you're hoping that there's a level of commitment that person is showing you so you can continue the relationship. The relationship might not be bad, but you're
Mm-hmm.
like, where is this going? What is the end goal here? And if you don't see that with the other person, you're like, what's going on there? And I think that was unfortunately the issue we saw with Mecole, where I guess to your point, she wasn't flexible to show that commitment to anybody in the house.
Right. Right. Yeah. All right. Well, as we're talking about commitments and relationships, we can move into the fourth rule, which says players should not let their emotions control them. Now, what do you think about Mecole in this regard? Since you were the one talking about relationships here. So.
Yeah, this is a funny one because I think I hate to keep bringing it back, but the viewers and listeners who've been watching this week in week out will potentially remember that when we ranked each person
Mm-hmm.
in the line of what we think for that week of who's doing best in this rule, I believe Mecole was either your or my top in the situation,
She
because
was
that was
mine.
she
Yep.
was yours. Yeah, that week I remember her literally ranting in the what was it, the kitchen room or the storage room, where she was just going off and
Mm-hmm.
saying like how annoying these players are, but keeping it to herself, not letting her emotions dictate how she needs to make a move, because she had a certain move she wanted to make in her head that she felt like emotionally, but it was like, this is not the right move. So we see her really, and I think this might be a testament to her outside work or what she is as a person, is able to compartmentalize her feelings and do the game move. And now the issue comes to be is that maybe we needed her emotions to control her just a little bit more. We needed a little bit of, when Felicia left, right? When she was walking at the door, she throws all the shade to people. Maybe
Yes.
we just need a little bit more of that in the house beforehand.
You mean when Mecole left? Yes.
When Mecole left, yes.
Yes. Yeah. In that podcast that you mentioned, it was the week that Jag was saved, so nobody left. The first time nobody left. For anyone, just as a reminder, like you had said, we ranked best and worst for each rule, and yeah, I ranked Mecole as number one because of all the reasons you just said. That she knew there were times when she disagreed with a plan, but she went along with it because she knew that if she pushed back too much, things could turn on her. And she ranted to us in private, and that gave us hope because those rants were often about how stupidly people had behaved due to their emotions. And she even said, it didn't matter if someone had said something mean about her family. She wouldn't change the strategic plan because of it. All of that was great in theory. All of that made us give her high marks, but it never came into practice. she went along with all those emotional people. And as we've noted many times already, she never made any actual moves herself.
And I think something we've noted beforehand that this house is unique, these house guests, where I find that they can take a little bit more, where in the sense that I feel like we've seen a lot of bonds repair. There's a huge
Mm-hmm.
Venn diagram. How many people have been mean to each other, said some certain things to them, but they're still working with each other. I
Yeah.
don't think we've seen this as much in certain past seasons where I think people are taking it on the chin a lot more. I mean, I think a perfect example is Felicia literally raging against America and Corey this week.
Yep.
And Corey essentially taking it on the chin and being like, hey, I think the reality of it is forget her being mad at us. Let's get out Mecole because
Right.
of A, B, and C. And we've seen this timing. I mean, Cameron and Izzy, we've seen Cameron and other people. I mean, we've just seen it continuously. You can be slightly a little bit more whiplashy, or I don't, for a lack of better terms, against the house guests, and they'll be like, you know what? I'm gonna let that go. And like brothers and sisters, when you fight, right, and you make up, you figure out a
Mm-hmm.
way. And I feel like in this season, it would have helped Mecole a little bit more to show that emotion because when you argue, when you fight, I'm not saying it's right, but there's a level of bonding afterwards where you're like, all right, we got through this moment. But I feel like there was never a situation for Mecole because she kept her cool so well, right? She just kind of
Yeah.
stayed completely emotionless through a lot of these things where there was never a level of bonding moment she had with other people outside of Felicia and Sari where they could be like, all right, let's make it work. We've gone through the gavel. I want to work with you throughout the whole game.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. All right. Well, we can move to the fifth rule, which says players need to pretend to be nice and play the social game. I don't think Mecole had any problems with the first aspect of pretending to be nice. In fact, I would say she did, exactly what the picture for this rule shows. Let's see if I can get it here without a reflection right there. Oops, there. Of, you know, sitting in front of a camera, uh, talking about her fellow players. The walls don't talk. So as long as you keep it to the camera, you can vent and you're fine. And she did. We saw that. But that was only the first part, the pretend to be nice part, not to beat a dead horse. But what was missing was the social game aspect because she did not turn her friendly relationships into anything that helped her advance her game.
There's a reason why there's 7 rules you've put together,
Yeah.
David, right? You can't just be great at one rule and hope that it gets you all the way through. And I think, like you said, this rule itself, she was perfectly fine in, but she didn't excel and utilized it to help any other connections happen.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I would not even say she was perfectly fine in the whole rule. The first half, she was friendly, but she didn't use that for a social game aspect of things.
Mhm.
So, all right, we could go to the sixth rule, which warns against being too much of a threat. And, I was going to say it initially might seem it wouldn't apply to her, but you've already hinted at some ways that it would. But yeah, we just spent however long repeatedly noting she wasn't really playing the game. And indeed, she told Julie that she felt she had to downplay herself to not be seen as a threat, which she certainly did. And, again, back to when we ranked who was doing best and worst, I gave this rule to Mecole also because I thought there was a lot more strategy and cunning in her head than she had shown. And there may have been, but it still stayed in her head and we never did see it. With all that being said, like I said, you mentioned a little bit earlier, she was voted out in part for being a threat.
Mhm.
At least more of a threat than Felicia, because a number of people figured she had a better chance of winning comps than Felicia. And she had done well as recently as coming a very close second in the veto comp.
Yeah, I think actually this rule was what she became a threat, and I think this is the worrisome part of. And I think she's honestly a very good um, example, I guess, for future Big Brother house guests to watch and see their game when they want to play an under radar game. That if you play too under the radar,
Mm-hmm.
eventually that will exponentially increase your threat level. And the reason being that is because people will not know where you are at in the game. They will see you as somebody, one, who hasn't got blood on their hands, two, you're not sure where they're aligned with exactly, and then three, combine that with her competition prowess, where she was getting second, and it's truly being under the radar, where they're like, oh, you know what, statistics, odds tell me she's bound to get number one eventually. And when she does that, what does she do? I mean, Mecole really became slightly before a silent assassin. She was right there in the metamorphosis that she could be that person where she's cutting people left and right. So she just didn't get to that point. I think she waited too long to get
She
to that
was
point.
an assassin's intern and never
Assassin's
graduated.
intern, exactly. You know, she was right there in the play. And that's the unfortunate thing, I think, for people like us to watch it, where we see that she has the ability. She's really kind of well-rounded. It's just kind of taking action to do it. You know, there's so many times, I think, in life, right, where you're trying to do something, or you're trying to perfect it, and you just don't do it because you're worried about whether it's failure, it's not perfect in it. But sometimes you just gotta click the switch and do it no matter how it's going to happen. I think we need to see that from Mecole, because her threat level was huge. I mean, her main ally, essentially, at that point, who was already on the block, and then you had Corey, who wanted to work with her, he starts seeing her as a threat because he's like, wait, hold on, is she really working with me?
Yeah, and that's exactly it, because there are lots of people in the house who can and have actually won comps. That in and of itself is not a problem, but it links back to, like you said, nobody knowing who she'd target if she won one. And it turned into this kind of proxy war. You know, Blue thought that Mimi would target Corey, so she wanted Felicia out. But Corey thought Felicia would target Cameron, so he wanted Mimi out. Meanwhile, Matt and Jag realized keeping Felicia would probably be bad for Corey, so they wanted Mimi out. So none of these people were like, oh, we really have to target Mimi. It was more like, well, we think she thinks a certain way compared to what we want. So that's why. It was all based on what others believed. But again, whose fault is that? It's her own fault for not making clear where she was.
100%.
All right. Well, the seventh rule says to trust almost nobody. Based on what we said earlier, she didn't trust anyone. So I guess we could say she was a success here for as far as that goes. But again, to repeat myself one more time, she took it so far that she wouldn't even talk to people.
Yeah, and I think this is one thing I was kind of looking at when kind of running things back with Mecole. I can't really remember whether through fake alliances or whatnot, but did she have any true bonds with somebody like Jag or Matt, you know, within the house? And it wasn't. And at this point in the game, really, if you don't have those bonds with certain people in there, you're really out there. And the issue is you need to make bonds with the people in the middle. You know, Mecole was in the middle. She saw this there, and she could kind of see she had a great purview because she was in rooms where these conversations were going. Every single person, beside maybe Cameron, really tried to talk to her and like give the information over to her. It was a very one-way street where they're just giving information to her. She had a good eye view on what's going on. And she could have seen that, hey, I need to trust somebody like Matt or Jag. Maybe not Jag, but Matt alone. Somebody that, you know, has connections on each side of it, and we can play that middle together. That's kind of what Jag has done, which I think is impressive, that identifying Matt as that person that he can trust and play the game with versus somebody else. She didn't really do that, and she needed to trust somebody.
Yeah, I mean, I think Jag a couple days ago made a comment to her like, this is the first time you've talked game to me in 65 days. Now, that's bad. That's bad. I don't remember if he made it to her or about her. I think he said it to her, but I can't 100% validate that in my memory. But yeah, it's just not good.
It's not good. And the last thing I just want to quickly add to that is that in a game where you're about to hit jury, you know that, and you know somebody hasn't really talked to you, in your head, you're like, would she vote for me? Would I get her vote? Is there anything in her that she has seen in my game? You don't know, you know, versus somebody like Felicia is somebody that, hey, we've had those conversations, we've had those fights, we've seen those things. And in Corey's head, too, potentially is like, you know what? She views me as a mastermind. That might be better than what Mecole views me as.
Yeah.
If I get her out, will she still vote for me begrudgingly? Right.
Right. Yeah. All right. Well, it is about time to wrap things up. So, what are your final thoughts about Mecole?
This is it's tough because Mecole was probably the closest person I wanted to my winner pick before Matt and unfortunately Cameron. And I really had high hopes for her. I also think it crushes me doing this whole episode. I really like Mecole as a person. I think
Mm-hmm.
she's really one, like I said before, very kind, very smart. I like the authenticity we see of her. And I just think that this just wasn't the game for her, And I say that as a person who also realizes this game might have not been for me. It's tough because you never know until you're in there.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think the hardest thing is we just never got to see her play. And one thing that sticks out most to me is when she was in the interview chair with Julie Chen, and she's like, well, I'm ready to run it back. I'm happy to run back, but I just don't think that would ever be an option for us to see because we didn't see her play the first time.
Right.
Well, she was there for 65 days. Her game was gone, not because, and she didn't lose this game because she overplayed, is because she underplayed, and she should be a warning to every player who wants to play an under radar game that if you're going to play an under the radar game, you need to know when to strike. And unfortunately, Mecole did not do that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you were made for that game, just not that particular season of that game.
Well, thank you, David.
With certain people who are running things there. Yeah. Yeah. It can be a good strategy in Big Brother to lie low and let the big guns aim at each other or game at each other for that matter. But at some point, you have to stand up and actually play the game. You need to be able to judge when to do it. But I would say maybe a good time would be when you're on the block 2 months in and claim you could be in trouble. Ideally, it would be sooner, but that would be the absolute last point. And yet Mecole didn't. The executioner was sharpening the blade, and she turned down the idea of working with other people. She was being marched to the guillotine, and she had a couple of non-specific discussions. She literally didn't tell anyone any specific game information until her head had already rolled. After she left the game, she told Julie, "I tried to play as hard as I could." My immediate response was, "Really?" I'm seriously not sure what she meant by that, because everything she did, everything else she said in her interviews indicated exactly the opposite. She didn't play hard at all. And in fact, she intentionally avoided it. She didn't even play soft. She just didn't play. And I know I may have sounded harsh about that for, this whole podcast. But a big part of the reason is she had potential. She has the brains. She saw a lot of what was happening around her. She chose to not do anything to actually play Big Brother. It reminds me of when I was coaching Little League Baseball. And one year, the kids were good. It was a good team. And they kept messing up because they weren't paying attention. They weren't listening. They weren't playing right. And it was so frustrating as a father and a coach to see this happen because they had the ability. Fast forward a few years, different team. This team is made up mostly of kids who they're just there to have fun. They are not good. They're not going to win, but they're there to have fun. Coaching that team was less frustrating because I didn't expect anything of them. And so we all just had fun. And so in some ways, it's worse to have someone who has potential and doesn't use it. And that's the thing. She had potential. And in fact, she appeared potentially more dangerous in comps. Now, she might have been able to use that in her favor if anyone knew where she stood. But they all worried that she was more likely to win comps than Felicia and do something that would potentially be a negative for their own games because, again, nobody really knew. And sometimes being a total unknown, a complete question mark, is even more dangerous than someone you know is coming right at you. You said it earlier. You can dodge or defend against a known enemy. But the unknown can be scarier than an Exorcist movie. And the one thing Mimi really worked hard at was remaining a complete unknown. And that is why Mecole lost.
Well said. Well said. I hope CBS paid for you for that Exorcist plug right there.
Yes, yes. From what I heard, they're going to need it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, before we continue into our predictions, remember that they will be spoiler free. I mean, we know who the HOH is, but other than that, they will be spoiler free. But if you want our full spoilery thoughts, we are all over social media.
We are. You can find us on a number of different social media platforms where we discuss Big Brother and now Survivor. I don't know how David does it because he's covering everything now. On Twitter, I am at the Ovi Kabir. On Instagram, I'm at Ovi Kabir. And on TikTok, I'm at Basmati Boy. You can find David all over the place. You can track him down specifically on his Linktree at Linktree/David Bloomberg. Or you can find him on most tech-based social media platforms like Twitter and Blue Sky as at David Bloomberg. And on the video platforms like TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram, he's at David Bloomberg TV. And Threads is connected to Instagram. He's also at David Bloomberg TV there as well.
Yeah, I've been posting at least 3, sometimes 4 videos per day at TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram. We've got Big Brother, we've got Big Brother live feeds, we've got Survivor, and even a few from other shows like The Traders Canada. And, you mentioned that, these other shows are on now. So, yes, this is the first week officially of doing double duty Why Blank Lost podcasting. Since it was supposed to be last week, but Big Brother and therefore us took the week off last week. Shortly before this podcast was released, my Why Blank Lost for Survivor 45 with Jessica Lewis as my co-host came out as well. So that's already out there. And then on top of that, I have previously appeared as a guest on several episodes of the Tradar podcast. To discuss different international seasons of The Traders. For the Canadian version that started this week, I have moved into the main hosting role over there. So you can find the Tradar, which is spelled TRAIDAR, at your usual podcast hosts or on YouTube, again, as audio. With that, we can move into predictions. And like I said, spoiler 3, but we know who won the HOH.
Mm-hmm.
And what a surprise it was when Bowie Jane won. And it wasn't just a surprise to us, because based on the look she gave when Julie announced it, it was a surprise to her too. Now, that was one of the worst tiebreakers in Big Brother history. With Bowie Jane initially saying Jared had been a zombie for half an hour, while Felicia said it was over a month. Now, admittedly, it seemed like over a month, but that obviously wasn't the answer. The question is what Bowie Jane will do, because even though she's been in more conversations than Mimi was, many of them were contradictory. And as I mentioned earlier, she'd just agree whoever she was talking to. So, as I always do, I wrote up these predictions before the live feeds came back on. So, all we know, or all I knew at the time, was Bowie Jane winning. I think that while people like Corey and maybe even Jag believe Bowie Jane could be used to target Cameron, I don't see it happening. He's been too nice to her. He's given her too much attention. Cameron wants Corey gone, but I also don't think that will happen. It seems like Bowie Jane has a beef with Felicia and Cirie. It may, I mean, if and when she eventually ends up going, well, at some point she will, I'll dig into it more, but I think it probably stems at least to the whole vote against Red when she wasn't included. But there's been other stuff going on there too. And the thing is, even if she didn't have a full-on beef with Cirie, I think that someone would tell her to nominate Cirie for the same reason Mecole was initially nominated, so that she can't win veto and pull down Felicia. So I do think those two will be the initial nominations. The real question is what will happen afterwards. Does she really want Felicia out? will the rest of the house even care what she wants if they have the opportunity to take out a bigger target? And I'm not even talking about Suri because she has good relationships still with too many of them. I'm more thinking about a backdoor. And again, that brings us to Corey. I just feel like he'll slip out of it again. And I think it'll be Blue. And
Mm,
so I think that, yeah, we'll have initial Felicia and Suri nominations, and then Blue will be backdoored and end up as the first juror while Felicia escapes again.
interesting. My predictions are pretty kind of close to yours. One thing I will say is that yeah, that whole competition, both of them almost look like they're trying to throw it the way they're doing it. I just think it's such irony when all the men this past week were saying, "Oh, we're never going to lose to
Yeah.
Felicia or Bowie Jane, so we need," and versus them being the last two there. I mean, it was essentially Felicia's HOH to win right there. She just didn't need to
Yes.
muck it up like that. I mean, that just destroyed me watching that to see. I have to think that they misunderstood the question, and that's
Yeah,
why.
I think not
But
to get into, post, afterwards there were on the live feeds. And I believe Bowie Jane said something like she thought the question was how long he was gone before he came back to be a zombie. And then by the time she realized it, that was why she added the 6.
I see.
Um,
Okay.
but then she also made comments later about how she didn't really want to be HOH. So I don't know. I think Felicia just messed up the math. I don't
Yeah.
know. Or maybe she multiplied it by 60 one too many times and it ended up being seconds instead of. I don't
Mm.
know.
Well, I had for my predictions, I thought she was not going to take a shot at Sari, but instead at Felicia and not Corey, anybody, but Blue. Put those two people on the block because I feel like a Bowie Jane HOH is not something she wanted, and she's going to do something that's going to kind of stir the house the least amount. I don't see her doing America or Corey. I don't really see her doing Cameron because I think she understands that would stir up the whole dynamic of
Mm-hmm.
the house. I think in her head, Felicia and Blue are the two people she puts there, and depending on who wins the veto, I think she'll try to keep it as same as possible. And I really do think she'll let the house dictate who goes home. I don't think she cares about who goes home outside of it not being her and her other alliance members. So I really feel like this is an HOH where it's going to be very resembling a week 2, week 3 HOH where it's like, I want the least amount of bloods on my hand.
Which she always does. Yes. All right. Okay, then I think that settles it for the predictions.
Yes, it does. And as we wrap up, I want to encourage people to check out the RHAP patron program at robhasawebsite.com/patron. Rob has so many patron-only podcasts for Big Brother, Survivor, and so many other shows that I've lost count. So jump on board and support shows like ours and everything on the network by becoming a patron at robhasawebsite.com/patron.
And make sure you're subscribed to all the RHAP podcasts by, well, normally I would say going to our YX Lost feed page, but hopefully that'll be fixed soon and you can still go to there. Or you can subscribe directly to the RHAP Big Brother feed at robhasawebsite.com/Big Brother. You'll find a ton of great content like the daily live feed updates, the Big Brother Stock Watch, us, and more.
And we finally want to thank Scott St. Pierre and the whole RJP and Reality TV wrap ups behind the scenes team for all the work they do, editing and posting everything else. We really appreciate everything they do to get our voices from our microphones to your ears. And again, as always, thank you so much to all the viewers who've been here and listeners who've been watching and listening us, even on the weeks we've had to take off because Big Brother decided to take off. Appreciate you staying with us as these allergies have hit me full throttle. I hope not too many sniffles have gone through, but hopefully next week we're all on board. As much as you watch this one, make sure you go watch David as well for Why Blank Lost for Survivor. Him and Jessica, I've been catching up on it. It's great Survivor season, a good Big Brother season. So we're getting kind of lucky on everything.
Yes. And thanks to you, Ovi, for joining me here once again this week. Pushing through the sniffles and throat and everything else. We'll be back in 7 days. I'll be back a day sooner with Jessica, but whichever it is, we will see you soon. Bye.